Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. We talk a lot about the buy now, pay later sector. It's pretty remarkable when you think that a decade ago, none of these companies even existed. While Afterpay is a market leader, there are certainly other companies making a big name for themselves. Take Sezzle, for example. You'll remember I spoke about the company last month. It's listed on the ASX, but has now announced plans to list in the US, where it does the bulk of its business. I'm pleased to say Sezzle co-founder and chief executive Charlie Youakim is my guest this morning, joining me from Minneapolis. Charlie, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Appreciate it.
I want to know, is it warming up over there yet? That's a freezing city you live in.
It's warming up. Our spring is here, and summer's coming quickly, and everyone's got bigger smiles on their faces.
Fantastic. Now, look, you're looking to list in the United States. I suppose a couple of things there. Given that most of your business is in Australia, why are you listed on the ASX? That's the first one. And the second one is why then move to the US? So let's start with why you listed on the ASX to begin with.
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of people have asked us that. And the main reason for listing on the ASX is when we did the listing, the Australian investor just had a better sense of our sector, our business model, and how powerful it could be because they had seen it permeate their Australian cities and e-commerce sites and could easily extrapolate the idea that this business model could also work in the United States. So I think that was probably the primary reason behind what we were doing. And we were talking to US investors at the time and then comparing those and contrasting those conversations with Australian investors. It was just a dramatic difference in understanding and I would say like attitude towards being a part of our company. And that's what made it a pretty easy decision for us.
Okay. But now most of your business is in the US, is that correct?
That's correct. Well over 90% of our business is in the US. Other markets for us include Canada, which is our second largest market. And we've done some flag planting, testing out other markets, India, EU, and now Brazil, but primarily North America.
Okay, so it kind of makes sense to move your listing to the US, is that right?
Yeah, I can't talk too much about it because of the dynamics of the listing and that we basically have announced things, but I can maybe silently nod my head if you have ideas.
Yep. That's a good way of putting it, particularly for a podcast. The body language is most important.
Definitely.
It's a hugely competitive market, the buy now, pay later market. And obviously in Australia, Afterpay has become one of the biggest companies in the country from literally nothing 5 years ago. There's Zipco, there's Split, there's PayRight. What is it that makes Sezzle that little bit different?
Well, I think the first thing we did is we tried to adapt the business model to the US environment. And I think primarily what we've done over time is adapted it towards trying to really be the high road player in the space. Not to say that we think the other players are low road. We really think highly of the entire space. But what we're trying to do is get to the upper echelon of being consumer friendly. And in the United States, our view is that means helping consumers get to the next stage of their financial futures. Because a lot of our customers, they're young. 70% are 35 and under. And many of them are credit disadvantaged in their current status. And I always tell people that if I had a kid that was 18 years old, I would give them a credit card so that they can build their credit score up to get to that next stage. And so we want to do the same thing for our customers. That's one example of it. So we have a product extension called Sezzle Up, where customers can enter our core product, no hit to credit, no damage, no harm, no foul. But if they want to, and they should want to, they can move up into Sezzle Up, where we can now help a customer build their credit score. I would say that sort of attitude towards our customer is probably one of the primary differences. We're also a certified B Corp, which I think speaks to our stakeholder approach and high road approach as a business, which really means that we're trying to balance purpose and profit as a company. And so going beyond just building credit scores, how else can we be a positive influence in the markets that we operate in?
Okay. Is it as competitive in the US as it is in Australia, the market? And I suppose PayPal, they seem to be the monster in the room in a way. What is the market over there like? Is it as competitive as here?
I don't think it is. I'm not to say that it won't get that way, because we always talk about the Australian market as the canary in the coal mine. It's basically 3 years ahead of the North American market. And so the way we see things heading, we think it's headed towards a market where multiple players will be installed on merchant websites, basically like the card networks before us. And so we think that's where it's going, but at the moment it's not. Most of the enterprise retailers out there still have not adopted. Many of them are thinking about it now, but we're only at around a 2% adoption rate in terms or take rate on e-commerce for buy now, pay later. And Australia, I think, around maybe 20% is the number. So I think there's a lot of room to grow.
And of course, a much bigger market in North America.
That as well.
Stay with me, Charlie. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Charlie Youakim, founder and CEO of Sezzle. So you're very similar to Afterpay in the sense that it's a pay-in-full model. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So how does that business model work for you and how do you make your money?
So the primary way we make money is through our merchant partners. We charge a processing fee to our merchants that is a premium rate over typical processing. Here in the US market, it's a higher processing rate than Australians would be familiar with. In the US, a typical processing rate for an online retailer is around 2.9% plus 30 cents. And so our default rate is 6% plus 30 cents. So a 3% delta on the processing fee. And when I was doing pitches to retailers, I still do, but my pitch was always, we're 3% more than your current processor. We're inclusive of processing. So we cover the processing for you. And so for that extra 3%, we're giving that customer extra purchasing power. We're increasing conversion. We're lifting AOV, and we're taking on fraud and repayment risk. All of that for the 3%. So if your margins are over 6%, it's a pretty easy decision for you to adopt because we're going to drive more volume to the bottom line and you'll be more profitable month on month. And that was the pitch. And I think that still remains the pitch today.
So a lot of debate in Australia about two things. One's the credit quality of the customers of the buy now, pay later groups. And the second is the potential for regulation. Where is Sezzle's credit quality at?
Well, our customers, I call them prime to be. A default name for or term would be subprime for our customer. 53% of our customers have a FICO score, that's the US credit score, of 600 and below, or no credit score at all. So they're typically lower on the credit spectrum, but it's because many of them are younger. I've seen charts of credit score by age, like 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings, and so on. And you can see it in the chart. 20-somethings just have lower credit scores because they're just getting started. And so I think our customer is just typically a younger, they call them thin file, so they don't have a lot of experience. Mm-hmm. And they're just getting their feet underneath them in the credit space. And that's our customer. And that's why we want to help them get to the next stage with Sezzle Up.
Okay. And then what about the threat of regulation? Certainly, I hazard a guess that the sector will be regulated in Australia over the next decade. Is that something that you're concerned about?
I'm less concerned about it here in the United States. We have a lot of payday lenders that cause a lot of problems for regulators. And they're typically, that's the lightning rod that they're focused on. I do think it's going to come here, though, in the US. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I actually think the players that are doing the right thing, which I think we are and many of our competitors are, I think in a way it protects the space. It protects the space from bad actors, people that want to put on a buy now, pay later hat and treat customers poorly. We can maybe help regulators create or design some of the schemes so that we can stop that from happening.
Okay. Now, in looking at Sezzle, I was looking at your share price pre-pandemic. That's a phenomenal growth rate in the 12 months, and we're kind of taking the pandemic out because I'm going from pre-pandemic to now. What is it that's got you to quadruple your share price? Well,
I don't know the exact, markets are markets, so it's always hard to determine what's built in there. But I know over that
not
time
always
period,
rational, Charlie. Not always rational.
Yeah, not always rational, definitely. But over that time period, I know that we've more than tripled underlying merchant sales and on the platform, revenues as well. We went from 15 million in 2019 to around 60 million in 2020 for revenues. We're getting more efficient as a company, and I think there's also a premium that's being granted for companies for achieving scale, which we're starting to get towards. So I think all of those probably play into the growth. But our view is keep your heads down, keep on growing, keep on building, keep on making an impact, and the rest will come, including share price.
Now, Charlie, you're a bit of a serial startup man, I believe. In fact, you had another startup called Passport. What was that? And what did you learn? Because I think most people that we talk to, most entrepreneurs we talk to, always take a lot out of previous ventures, successful or not. They just take a lot out of them. And I suppose I'm asking you the same thing. So what was Passport and what did you take out of that you've been able to put into Sezzle?
Yeah, so Passport was a mobile payments provider in the parking transportation space. We built mobile payment apps that we'd sell to cities, and the cities would put up stickers and signage and ask customers or parkers to download the app to pay for parking on city streets or in parking lots. And it's actually a very similar business model to what we do today at Sezzle. Instead of the parking operators, we sell to merchants. They put up virtual stickers on their websites, and then we ask customers to adopt. So it's actually a very similar business model. So I think in some ways, I learned the business model dynamics of B2B to C at Passport. But I'd say the things I learned most were, we didn't have mentors at Passport, my prior company. We basically learned everything the hard way. And when you learn things the hard way, you remember them, what the right things to do are, what the wrong things to do are. And I think that's probably my biggest learnings from that company. It was a successful business. It still is a successful business, which I'm proud to say. But taking those learnings and all the bumps and bruises and taking them into Sezzle, I think it helped us cut a lot of corners and avoid a lot of mistakes, which was extremely important in this space because the competition level is very high. I have a high degree of respect for all the players in the space. I feel like it's the major leagues, and having a lot of practice before entering the major leagues helped.
Yeah. Are you surprised by just the take-up rate, particularly in Australia? And, in the US, there are a number of new players, and I mentioned PayPal earlier on. If it's only got 2% penetration, there's a long way to go. But are you surprised just how quickly the buy now, pay later group, and I use that term very generically, has accelerated, particularly in Australia?
Yeah, it is pleasantly surprising. I think when you look at it, you start to understand why. Because it's a free product, it's giving the customer purchasing power. It's basically free budgeting. So instead of having to go into a budgeting tool and figure out your finances, if you purchase with Sezzle or one of our competitors, it basically chunks out those payments for the customer. So I think there are a lot of benefits, and the fact that it's a free service, that really helps with adoption rate. But it is a bit surprising. We did see some dynamics in the US market that looked similar to Australia. There was a big percentage of customers, young customers here, that were paying with debit, which was on the rise. And, when I look at it today, I think what we're doing is we're helping these customers that like using their debit card creditize the debit card in a very safe way and in a free way. So I think that's probably why we're having this great take up. And Australia, some different dynamics, but we're seeing a lot of corollaries between the two markets.
We'll be back in a minute. I'm talking to Charlie Youakim, founder and CEO of buy now, pay later company Sezzle. Now, just a final question. We always like to throw in a left field question. You live in West Minneapolis, which isn't far from where the first protest started after the death of George Floyd. Now, you've been quite vocal in your support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you've been clear about Sezzle being an ethical business. You talked about the purpose earlier in the interview here, particularly for your target demographic. How important is it for that target demographic, and you've explained to us they're younger people, to actually have a purpose as well as a business?
We think it's extremely important. We're hearing it from our customers. We're hearing from our own employees. And that's why we are probably more vocal than more traditional companies about topics that are occurring, because we know that it's important. And we want to be seen as leading society in the right way as a company. And it was definitely impactful to everyone at the company. The event happened, I think, less than 2 miles away from my home. And when we were having the riots and stuff, we had our neighborhood, a major neighborhood watch. So, definitely hit home. And it was difficult to watch a lot of it. But I think we're finally on the back end of it because of the close of that trial, which I think left a lot of people relieved. So I think a lot of Minnesotans and Minneapolis natives are feeling a lot better about things today. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that a business actually has a purpose, which is well beyond making money.
I do too. Our view is that when you're building a company for the long term, and that's what we are always thinking about at Sezzle, 7 to 10 years out, if you think beyond just making profits, if you think about pleasing all the stakeholders of the business, including community, my view, and I think a lot of our team's view, is if you do that, you're gonna create a successful business. And now the goal is to make it a big business so that we can have an even bigger impact with our positivity.
For sure. Charlie, thanks for talking to Fear and Greed.
Sean, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
That was Charlie Youakim, co-founder and chief executive officer of Buy Now, Pay Later group Sezzle. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.